Hello, folks, and thank you guys for checking out our 2020 annual meeting this year via PowerPoint. My name is Dana Boyle, and I'm president of the Northern Neck Vegetable Growers Association, and I welcome you. We would love to be able to be with you all this year in person to fellowship and have lunch together and all that fun stuff. But since that could not happen, I will instead take this time to thank our extension agents, Stephanie and Trent, for putting together this information pack program. For those of you joining us that are not members of the Northern Neck Vegetable Growers Association, please consider contacting me or one of our members or one of our extension agents to find out more about our educational programs, our educational trips, our scholarship, and more. We'd love to share more information with you about our fun association. At this time, I'd like to thank our sponsors shown on your screen for their support of our 2020 annual meeting. Please fill out your survey at the end of the presentation to have your name entered into a drawing to win a gift card sponsored by these businesses.
Hello, my name is Kemper Sutton. I'm a graduate student in the Department of Entomology at Virginia Tech, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about developing an IPM program for edamame in the Mid-Atlantic. Before we get into the development of that program, let's go over what exactly is edamame. Edamame is actually the same exact thing as the conventional soybeans grown here in the United States. However, it's harvested when it's still a vegetable or at the R6 growth stage, when those beans have completely filled out and the plant is still green. After that, it's when senescence occurs and those leaves start to fall off. So you really pick it at that peak point in which those pods have filled out. Even though the United States is the biggest producer of soybeans in the entire world, we're actually importing upwards of 95% of our edamame or vegetable soybeans from overseas. So this project is really part of a USDA initiative to create production of edamame in the Mid-Atlantic so our farmers can remain competitive on the global scene. Really, the first question that needs to be answered before we develop this program is, how do we treat this crop? Do we treat it more like our conventional soybeans, or is it going to be treated more like our green beans? And after a couple of years of research, I think we're catering more towards a vegetable. After 2 years of research, we've really determined there's three main types of damage we're seeing on edamame. The first type is chewing damage, and this is primarily done by corn earworms, where they take their mouth parts and chew through the exterior of the pod and eat the bean inside. Our second type of damage is piercing sucking damage, which is primarily done by stink bugs. However, we are seeing some potato leafhopper damage early in the year. Now, this picture in the middle here is actually an edamame pod that's been fed on by stink bugs, and they actually take their straw-like mouth part and pierce the exterior of the shell and go into the bean and suck the juices out. And so what you're seeing here on the bean, those markings are actually from feeding from the stink bugs. Now, the interesting thing about this picture here is that you can't see any of that damage that's on those beans from the exterior of the shell. So that meaning you can walk into your field and have a beautiful crop of edamame. The exterior of the pods look beautiful, but if you were to open them up, you could see that damage inside. So that's particularly worrisome because if a farmer was to take his crop and sell it to the market, it don't want to take one person at a restaurant to open that up and realize that looks really gross. And lastly, our third type of damage is defoliating damage. This is primarily done by Mexican bean beetle, Japanese beetle, and bean leaf beetle. And that's when they skeletonize the leaves and reduce photosynthesis. Now, the current threshold for defoliation prior to flowering is 40%. And so because we're treating this more as a vegetable, we're really concerned about the pods, and that's only occurring after flowering. So that threshold of 40% defoliation before flowering is going to stand because we're not seeing any yield loss due to that. Due to the fact that we're treating this crop as a vegetable, that cosmetic damage being created by stink bug feeding is actually our primary type of damage we're seeing, and it's very concerning. So for the sake of time, I'm really going to focus this presentation on stink bugs and the damage we're seeing. So in this slide here, I've got the three main types of stink bugs we're seeing. Starting on the far right, most of you may be familiar with this one. This is the invasive brown marmorated stink bug from Asia. This is the one that you primarily see in your house and attic during the wintertime where it's trying to find a place to stay over winter. And that can be a very serious pest of soybeans and edamame both, and we saw that quite a bit this past couple of years. Now in the middle slide there is our native green stink bug where both the adult and nymph can feed on the pods. And then lastly on the left there is the southern green stink bug, which is just starting to show up in the state of Virginia in the southeastern part of the state near Suffolk and the eastern shore. And what's really bad about this stink bug in particular is that it's never really shown up in high numbers before, but these past couple of years we've had really high densities and once they get in your field, their population can really explode. Now let's get into the development of this IPM program from Edamame. So like I mentioned, we already have IPM programs developed for our conventional soybeans. So really the focus of this is whether or not it's going to be a vegetable or it's going to be more like our soybeans in terms of these insect thresholds. And so we used current conventional soybean thresholds on Edamame to see if they needed to be adjusted. So we had 3 treatments. We had a control, an IPM treatment, and a conventional treatment. Now, all 3 treatments had weekly insect counts, and in the IPM treatment, if we went over any current thresholds for any soybean economic pest, we would spray those pests at threshold. And our conventional treatment is a treatment that is going to be treated more as how a farmer might treat it, is that they see any kind of pest in their field, they might put a spray out regardless if it's over threshold or not. So on top of our weekly insect counts in all 3 treatments, we sprayed accordingly if they went over threshold. At harvest, we also measured yield. We took 50 pods per treatment and opened them up looking for stink bug feeding damage. Now I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about what exactly we sprayed on both the conventional IPM treatments. And starting with the conventional treatment, I really wanted to use an insecticide that's commonly and widely used in our state, and that's going to be a pyrethroid known as Warrior 2, and this can really control your lepidopterans and stink bugs. So we really mostly use that weekly or bi-weekly from flowering until harvest in that treatment. But for our IPM treatment, I wanted to go with 2 other insecticides that were a little bit more environmentally friendly and more commonly used in the vegetable industry. And that first one is Coragen, which is commonly used to control lepidopterans, also known as caterpillars, and then Transform. And Transform is mostly labeled to control aphids and whiteflies. However, there is some data showing that it controls stink bugs, and actually in one of our trials on peppers in a previous year, as you can see in the table here, Transform did suppress stink bug numbers when compared to the control. Even though it wasn't significant, there is some visual differences. So I chose Transform to see if it might control stink bugs a little bit and be a better choice. I wanted to dive right into yield off the get-go because I wanted to show that at both locations which we did this trial, which is at the Eastern Shore of Virginia and at Kemper Farms, which is near Blacksburg in the mountains, that in 2019 there was no differences in yield amongst treatments. And then again in 2020, there were no differences between yield between locations. And this is really showing that yes, maybe these thresholds for conventional soybeans stand for the fact that they don't decrease yield, but because we are treating this crop as vegetables, we're really focusing on the cosmetic damage on those pods, and so that means that we need to be looking more at pod damage, which I'm going to get to here in a second. Now, for the sake of time, I've only included this one line graph. This is stink bugs per sample on Edamame at the Eastern Shore in 2020 when we had really high stink bug numbers this year. And there's 3 lines here. The green is the conventional treatment, the red's the IPM treatment, and the blue is the control, which received no sprays. The dates are on the x-axis, and then the y-axis is the number of stink bugs. And as you can see here, there's these little upside down Wi-Fi symbols, and those represent when we sprayed that treatment. So the green's for conventional, red is for IPM. And so especially with the red IPM line there, you can see that those numbers rose up. We knocked them back down when they went over threshold, especially around 926. You can see IPM really took off and we knocked it back down again. And then the conventional stayed pretty low because we had consistent weekly or bi-weekly sprays from flowering until harvest. So how do the sprays and different treatments affect pod damage? And so I'm starting here with 2019. As you can see, the black upside down Wi-Fi symbols represent the number of sprays that treatment received during that growing season. And so just to go off with 2019, we had very low stink bug numbers in 2019 compared to 2020. At the Eastern Shore, we actually had such low numbers of stink bugs. We never went over threshold a single time, but we still sprayed the conventional 3 times, and there was no significance between the control conventional and the IPM treatment. Now at Kemper Farms near Blacksburg, Virginia, the conventional received 4 sprays, and the IPM went over threshold 1 time. And there actually was a significant difference between number of pods being damaged between the control and the other 2 treatments. Now in 2020 compared to 2019, we actually had very high numbers of stink bugs at both locations compared to the previous year. Starting with the graph on the left of the Eastern Shore, the The conventional received 5 sprays, and the IPM received 3, and the control obviously received 0. And so you can actually tell that we sprayed the conventional 5 times and knocked damaged pods down to less than 10%, and IPM just slightly higher than 10%. So there was a significant difference between the control and IPM. However, I want to note with that slide in particular that we had such high numbers of stink bugs at that eastern shore that we couldn't even go with any of our IPM-friendly insecticides, such as the Transform and Coragen I mentioned, that we had such high numbers that those 3 sprays on IPM were actually the pyrethroid warrior 2, because we were afraid if we used anything else, we weren't going to be able to suppress the high number of stink bugs in that field down low enough. Now, in contrast with the graph on the right at Kentland Farms, the conventional also received 5 sprays, 4 of which were Warrior 2 of pyrethroid that we talked about previously, but I also used Transform once. And then on the right, we went over thresholds for stink bugs twice, and both times I only sprayed Transform. So that treatment did not receive conventional. And as you can see, there actually is a big significant difference between the conventional treatment that received, Warrior 2 and the IPM treatment that received just Transform. And basically the IPM and control treatments had the same amount of pod damage, which is very concerning. So basically, as a conclusion of this research in developing an integrated pest management program for edamame, we basically determined that even though edamame is the same plant as conventional soybeans, when it starts to flower, it needs to be treated exclusively as a vegetable. And so a lot of those current soybean thresholds developed for stink bugs and corn earworms actually need to be stricter and lower so that we can control that pod damage we're seeing. Additionally, Transform is probably not the best choice. We're probably going to be so concerned about that cosmetic damage, we're going to have to use more hardcore insecticides such as Warrior 2. And back to that cosmetic issue again that I keep going on about, stink bugs are the biggest pest of edamame. Any kind of damage that looks like that, those beans aren't going to be marketable. And ultimately, I want to end with the fact that better stink bug scouting methods need to be developed. There's been research showing that if you take your sleep net and you're walking down your bean field sleeping back and forth, brown marmorated stink bugs especially are able to see you or sense you coming, and they'll actually drop off the plant onto the ground before you even get to them. So if you're a farmer trying to scout your edamame field or even just your conventional soybean field this year, your numbers might not be accurate because those stink bugs are able to detect you coming, and we need to find better ways to monitor that. With that, I just want to say thank you for tuning into this presentation. I want to thank both my advisors, Dr. Tom Kuhar and Dr. Stephen Rideoff, for helping me accomplish this research, as well as all my lab mates, students, staff, and faculty at both locations, and the grant for funding this research. Feel free to submit any questions, and I'll gladly contact you back about answering those.
Please take a moment to complete the brief survey linked below. Your responses will give us a better understanding of how we are doing and how we may better serve your needs in the future. To access the survey, you may scan the QR code on the left using your smartphone's camera or QR code scanning app, or enter the link on the right into your internet browser. Those who complete the survey have the opportunity to enter a raffle for the chance to win a Visa gift card provided by our generous sponsors. Thank you.